day, but I'm hoping if I just literally push the record button, we'll be off.
Once, and it should record. There you go.
We are.
Recording.
Thank you. Mr. Lindup, how on earth are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Julian.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that you've agreed to do this, and I've got quite a lot of questions from other fans for you. If I could start, funnily enough, my first two questions are not actually about yourself. They're actually about your dad, David, and your mum, Nadia. So as far as I heard that David had composed a couple of theme tunes, is that correct?
He did a variety of things. He came up as in the jazz scene, first as a player, but very quickly as an arranger. And his kind of arrangement and orchestration skills were definitely to the fore. And he did a lot of jazz arrangements of for big bands and small ensembles and so on. And kind of got into TV and music and film music and library music over the years. And as a composer, he wrote a lot of incidental music. So, for example, in the TV series The Persuaders, with Roger Moore and Tony Curtis, he didn't write the theme. I think John Barry wrote the theme, but my dad was one of the people that would write the sort of the episodic music that happened during the program.
Okay, cool.
He was very good at that. He wrote for a feature film, which was a kind of vehicle for Raquel Welch called Fathom, and he wrote the theme and all of the music for that. His probably biggest claim to fame was that he worked with the Jack Parnell Orchestra on all of the Muppet shows.
Really? Wow.
And he wrote all the arrangements for the kind of star numbers. So when there would be a guest star on the show, as there was regularly, anyone from Buddy Rich, Frank Sinatra, Shirley MacLaine, whoever came on the program, they would do like a number with Kermit and Miss Piggy or something in the middle of the show. And my dad would have written the arrangement for those things, which was a deadline thing. He did a lot of deadline work. I mean, I can remember that often there'd be a knock on the door at 6 a.m, which was the copyist arriving to take his score and write out all the different parts for all the different instruments in time for the session or TV session or whatever.
Wow.
That was to go. So, I mean, this is, of course, in the days before computers, everything's handwritten.
Wow.
So, if my dad wrote a score, then that had to be copied out for all of the different instruments in their correct clefs and, writing and so on.
Wow, fantastic. And obviously, were you sitting there as a child watching him do any of this, and that's how it sort of got passed to you, or?
No, not really. I mean, he had his own kind of study upstairs when I was very young, and I was just vaguely aware that was where he worked. There was a little piano in there and so on. And I mean, my parents kind of separated when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So that later on, I'd go and visit him at his his new house, as it were, and then he'd have another study in a similar setup where he'd have scores out and he'd have a little piano or an organ. I used to have this little organ, which I loved playing when I was a kid. Maybe that kind of gave me my first taste of keyboards, because it had different presets that I could. So Philocordia. And, it just had different sounds, and it had one setting where you pressed it and you play a chord on each note and stuff like that. So I suppose I sort of absorbed it rather than, stood it and watched him doing it.
Yeah,
in that sense.
Okay, and your mother was actually, is it an actress, and she's a songwriter as well? Is that correct?
Yes, she. I mean, her history is very interesting. She came from British Honduras, which is now Belize in Central America. She joined the call to help the mother country, in effect, at the beginning of the Second World War, and it was about halfway through, and they invited people to come and help the war effort. So she joined up. She came to the UK in 1941. And spent most of it in Scotland, serving there, doing a lot of communications and Morse code and stuff like that. And then went back to Belize after the war, and then worked as a headmistress because she was a teacher before then, She was a headmistress in a school in right in the bush of Belize. And then in 51, she came back and she went to the London School of Economics and she studied there for a year. And then the sort of singing career took off and the acting, training happened. And she became very involved in the folk scene in the 60s, which was a bit like what called the open mic thing now. The folk clubs were very much that, where anyone could come, and sing a song. And, Mum had been grown up with all of the folk songs, from being a sort of British colony. She knew a lot of that, but also, people were singing religious songs, semi-religious songs, protest songs, anti-war songs. Anything was kind of game. And she got involved in a group of people that eventually, she started performing at bigger gigs and going to the Edinburgh Festival. And then she was on a regular TV program with Martin Carthy and Sidney Carter and Isla Cameron on a Sunday, and singing a whole variety of different music. And she made a couple of solo albums. And accompanists would come to the house regularly to sort of practice with her, so I kind of hear that going on. And she had a big tape recorder eventually, which she used to record some of her things on, a big sort of reel to reel thing, which I was eventually allowed to sort of play with, as it were. So I'd sort of get the mic and start singing Beatles songs into it and working out how the sort of echo delay thing worked and sort of.
But I mean, so obviously between the two of them, your genes were almost inherent to do the job that you've now ended up doing.
Yeah, well, the sitting room was kind of the music room. I mean, there was a piano in there was a guitar, there was some, hand drums, and and of course the radiogram and all the record player, and because that was the other thing, the influences came from all of the records that my mum and dad had bought, which were all across the board, so folk music, bossa nova, musicals, soundtracks, classical stuff, and kids records, just everything. So yeah, I mean that was my playroom in effect.
Okay, I'm pretty certain I met your mother, and I'm pretty certain it was actually, well, I know I've met her, but I'm pretty certain it was backstage at the after party at 1994 at the Royal Albert Hall, when essentially Level 42 was actually finishing. Now, after 15 years of starting at gigs like where I first met you at Redbridge Technical College in 1981, playing to 90 to 100 people, ending up at Glastonbury paying to 60,000 people. It's November, I think, or October, November 1994, and it's about to end. What on earth was going through your mind of what do you do now, or what's going to happen to you?
Well, I mean, Mark and I sort of talked about let's put the whole thing on the shelf, and so that was the kind of precursor to that particular tour, and saying, this is going to be our last tour. It was kind of like, this will be our last for the time being. I don't think either of us thought that this is it forever, but it was kind of, we'd had a really, really good run, and it had been really, intense, some of it, and we've been through, a lot of building the success and hitting the road and then having the success, and then, the Gould brothers leaving and sort of managing all of that. But having a lot of support from the record company, and then that kind of seemed to fall away with the sort of Forever Now project. It was a very difficult project to get to fruition because, we'd had the sort of divorce from Polydor with the Guaranteed album at that time.
Right.
And we sort of thought, you know what, it's kind of getting quite tough right now. So let's do this tour. Let's have a break, and then pick it up, when we feel like it at some point in the future. So that was that. So, but it was an opportunity, of course, to, do different things. I mean, I didn't know what was on the horizon, but I knew that, there would be some opportunities to do stuff or to not do stuff. I mean, it's not really fair to say it, but in a way, it was a kind of preparation for lockdown, because all I'd known from music college, we made Love Meeting Love before I left music college. It came out in May 1980. First thing that happened is we went to the studio after I left college in July, went into, Hillside to record the early tapes with Andy Soiker. And after about 3 months of nothing happening, started to get our first gigs at sort of Flicks and 06 and so on.
Hey, good old Zit, yeah,
And
yeah.
and gradually it started to build up. Of course, then we got the big break with the Police tour, which led to our first gig in Paradiso, which led to everything taking off in Holland in a big
Yes,
way.
yeah.
Um, but after then it was kind of album tour, album tour, album tour, and who am I if I'm not doing this? And that was the sort of one of the questions that I addressed. And if you like, it was a identity check because all I'd known was, Mike Lindup of Level 42
Yeah.
doing the next album and doing the next tour, or between the next album and the next tour. And if there was a no next album, next tour, certainly in the immediate future, is like, what do I do?
Mm.
So yeah, that was a time to explore lots of different things, and that kind of experience is sort of useful now.
I know you did actually go off driving, didn't you? I've seen some photographs of you racing a CV Dushava, a two CV.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, that was one of the things I did do is the racing, which was great. I mean, that had kind of started in. I did my first season in '93 and carried on in '94, and then the last sort of full season of racing in '95. But yeah, that was definitely something completely different.
And did you do well?
I did all right. I mean, I would say, you can imagine, if you're pretty good as a driver, which I would say I am, then you think, oh yeah, well, this racing lot can't be too hard. But
Mm.
once I started doing it, I realized what a huge gulf there is between, driving a car, fairly fast in sort of road conditions and being on a racetrack. It's a completely different ball game. And the largest part of it is the mentality and, that kind of not only the skill of being able to, I mean, anyone can push the accelerator down and late brake, but to be able to have the car control and the mental thing of knowing when to do it, and also that drive of that kind of killer instinct
Mm.
of going for gaps and doing a bit of door banging and that kind of
Hmm.
thing. It didn't come to me naturally at all. I tend to
Mm.
be a fairly sort of polite person, and I found that ruthlessness, that you needed was not easy to dig into. But so my first year, I think I ended up, I can't remember where I came, 12th, I think, in the
Oh,
championship.
that's not bad.
The second year, I started to try and take it more seriously, and I got really involved in quite a few scrapes. And ended up sort of way at the back of the field by the end of the year, and I broke my thumb during that year as well.
Did you?
So I thought, well, okay, I got another year. The car's potentially a race-winning car because even in the world of 2CV, there are still, although they were fairly evenly matched, there was, little bit of, extra speed here or there
Mm.
makes a big difference. And so I thought I need to be better at this. So I went and did a week's training at the Jim Russell sort of motor racing school at Donington at the beginning of the year. And that kind of paid off. And I ended up joint second in the championship at the end of the year. Well, in
Oh,
fact,
brilliant.
I ended up third because you couldn't
Mm.
have a joint second. So on
Oh,
goal
that's
difference,
cool.
I was third.
Mm.
But I mean, it was pretty good. But I never actually won a race. I just was consistent with the points.
Right.
But I tell you what, it's now watching racing, and particularly, watching either Formula One, which I love, or Le Mans 24-hour race, which is amazing, which I've been to several of those. It's kind of like when you've been involved in some kind of sport and you watch it on the telly, it's like you see a lot more, you get a lot more,
Yes.
and can realize a lot more of what's actually going on behind the scenes than if you're
Yeah.
just watching as a punter. I mean, I used to watch F1 in the late 80s and watch Ayrton Senna winning everything and think, oh, they're just going around in circles and it's
Mm.
kind of boring because he's winning everything. Having been on the racetrack, it's like, okay, now I see what this is all about.
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, you got to work for it. Yeah. Am I also right in understanding that whilst you're on tour, you guys, the whole band, go off go-karting?
Well, I mean, sometimes. I mean, it's sort of become a tradition that we try and have a curry slash bowling
Right.
slash go-karting on a day off if it's possible. It doesn't always work out, and
No.
there isn't always a go-kart track, and sometimes it just ends up being the meal. Sometimes you find a bowling alley, so it's the meal and the bowling, and
Mm.
some days we're near a go-karting track, so it's
And
a go-karting and then a meal.
how do you fare with that? Because I've been told Pete Ray Biggin is quite a whiz at go-karting.
He is the quickest.
Is
It's
he?
very
Right.
annoying because he's quick and he knows it.
Is he?
But
Right.
I've come in a good second to Pete. But some of our crew, a couple of the crew guys are really quick. Mark Clements, who does front of the house, he's pretty handy in a kart. A couple of the lighting guys were pretty good. But Pete always somehow seems to come out on top, and it's so annoying. But he is. But he's small, but I don't think he's necessarily that much lighter. But he's just got it. So got to hand it to him.
Excellent. If we can just go back to the Guildhall Music Academy, who did you actually meet first there?
It's the Guildhall School of Music and
Yes.
Drama is its official title.
Hmm.
So I met Phil there, and Phil at one stage was having lessons with my percussion teacher because I was there as a first study percussionist.
Right.
I was playing piano for longer, and I was at music school at Chetham's in Manchester for 4 years before I got into the Guildhall. And while I was there, I'd taken up percussion as a study, classical percussion. So that's like playing the timpani and the snare drum and
Yeah.
the cymbals and all of the tune percussion, vibraphone, xylophone, marimba. And I figured that you needed to get into the music college on an audition basis. And I figured I stand a much better chance as a percussionist than as a concert pianist because, concert pianists, they practiced 8 hours a day. And, I was surrounded by budding concert pianists at Chetham's and thought, I'm not at that level of ability.
Mm.
So I auditioned as a percussionist. I got in and I had a great percussion teacher, a guy called Bob Howes, in my first year there. And I walked in one day and I heard the college drum kits. We had a little drum kit set up in one of the percussion rooms. I had this being played in a way that I knew it wasn't one of my fellow percussion students. I thought, who the hell's that? So sort of knocked on the door, went in, and we introduced ourselves. And he told me, he'd come up from the island. He was having lessons every 2 weeks with Bob, and so we started chatting about music and musicians that we liked, and we ended up sort of jamming. Me on the piano and him on the drums, and then he told me about Mark and Boone, who were then going around America, trying to make something happen. And when they came back, I then met Mark, out at a cafe in Oxford Street, and Phil, and we were talking. I was playing drums, I was playing drums in a cover band at college, because that was the thing, being at a college where they had drama students as well as music students. There was a lot of interest in theatre and musicals, and there was a guy running pop workshops, and where you could drop in and singers could try out stuff with people who could sort of back them and so on. So it was it was really I was thinking I might become a session drummer. I had a drum kit at home that my dad had given me before I went to college. And so, all our talk was about who's the best drummer, and I just bought some Billy Cobham drumsticks and all of that kind of stuff.
Which obviously, no, it's not Hot Water. One of I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember which track it is where all of you actually play drums together, don't you? On stage. I said it's not.
Well,
Hot
we
Water.
did it. Yeah, we did sort of percussion breaks in a few things. Are You Hearing? Had a drum break in it fairly early. Well, I actually got behind the kit, and then Phil and Mark were on the rototoms, and I think Leroy was hitting the congas and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd sort of introduced a percussion break in a few times along the way in different numbers, and which was definitely fun to do.
Have you any idea where Leroy is? Because no one seems to have found him. Because High Tension also celebrated their 40th year, I think, last year, and they were desperately trying to reach him and couldn't find him. So I don't know where he is.
I've no idea. I haven't heard from him or seen him in years and years, so I don't know.
Yeah, I must admit, when I obviously, as you know, I was there at the almost at the beginning, and with Leroy, I used to have quite nice little chats because, fun enough, I did actually learn percussion, and I can play drums myself, but not particularly well. So I do remember actually having quite a few chats with him back in the day.
Hmm.
um, Now, on to obviously changes. You've just re-released it on orange vinyl. And funnily enough, one of the questions I had was from Matt Bell. What's your favourite colour? So is it orange? Because obviously that's
Yeah, no, yeah, it's boring. I mean, I always would say blue, but
yeah,
um, I mean, it's kind of like a question that um, is I don't really attach any great storing. I mean, when I was younger, I think it was probably more of a thing. But I would say if I had to choose color, it would probably be blue. But
blue,
then,
yeah,
which blue? Because there's so many different kinds.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, on to the tracks. Now, fun enough, my personal two are Desire and West Coast Man. Probably because I prefer more, I like dancing. So, therefore, the more sort of beatier songs and more upbeat songs are the ones I like. It seems Desire in particular seems very romantic. Is it about somebody you loved or loved?
No, it wasn't about a specific person. It was
Hmm,
more about the um, my point of view of noticing that I mean, I was always looking for the one. That was kind of the thing when I was in my younger years, thinking there is the one out there.
hmm,
And also, obviously, one of the, if you like, perks of the job is that you get to be in a situation where you're on stage in a kind of glamorous setting, and
right.
you can meet people after the concert that are enamored with you because of who
Yeah.
they think you are. um, and like any other red-blooded male, I was kind of you know looking for um, somebody to have a kind of liaison with every now
Hmm,
and again, and the opportunities would arise. So I was kind of
yes.
looking into that and thinking, but this was more like thinking, that there'll be someone out there who's kind of like stunning, but then what comes with that is like, oh, you got to be careful because you don't just want to go for the looks. I mean,
Right.
on a kind of lots of different sort of levels, but it was about the actual experience of desiring someone, and then do you go for it, or and will they be the one, and
Hmm.
how will it pan out? And so it's those ideas I was exploring.
Okay, on West Coast Man, again, it comes to cross, it basically somebody looking to escape the hustle and bustle of the city. Have I got that correct?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. And in fact, when I was searching for this place up in Scotland, I took about a year and a half. I ordered I would get the newspaper, one of the local newspapers, the
No,
Open
no right,
Times.
no right move back in those days.
No, absolutely not. So every week the Open Times would arrive through my letterbox down in London, and they had a property section, and I had a bit of money, and I'd seen there were various things that led me to buying a place in Scotland. I mean, one was seeing the film Ring of Bright Water when I was young, and being completely enraptured by that whole idea, which is of a guy who is working, in an office in London and not enjoying his job. And he suddenly sees an ad in the paper for this cottage up in the west, in the wilds of the Highlands,
Ah,
and he goes and he buys it, and he feels a bit lonely, so he comes back down to London and he sees an otter in a pet shop, which of course you'd never condone or see
right.
nowadays. But he buys this otter, and that becomes his companion, and he has all kinds of adventures up there and has to do up the cottage because it's described as being a bit tatty, and of course it's a complete wreck, and he has to do it all up,
Hmm.
and then he has to learn how to survive, and then of course his otter meets a dog who is a lady owner, and then they go into a
Ah,
relationship and stuff like
right.
that. So this whole kind of romantic notion, and it has a very sad ending. But that kind of stayed in my mind. And when I was coming up to Scotland, because also when my mum was singing at the Edinburgh Folk Festival in the 60s, we basically spent our summer holidays driving all around Scotland,
Right.
and particularly the West Coast and the Highlands. And so I had very, very strong memories and associations. So when I started coming up there again with Level 42 in the beginning of the 80s, I was kind of looking around and looking at the scenery, and it reminded me so much of those good times. And I was thinking, I would love to have a place that I could come and, spend time in Scotland. And
Mm.
so I started to look for a holiday home. And eventually I found it. But before I did, there was this one day, and I was right up the northwest, and I'd gone to some, I think, a restaurant for my lunch. I'd renting a car, just driving around looking at places. And I came out the entrance of the hotel. It was this sort of this time of year, March, and there was this bright blue sky and these puffy clouds and this wind just blowing in from the sea and just, filling your lungs. And I kind of, that was like, I said to myself, this is it, the West Coast. I'm a West Coast man. It
Right. So
has
it's
to be.
like an epiphany almost.
It has, yeah, exactly. It has to be the
Yeah.
West Coast. And I found out there was a beach nearby, and I went onto that beach, and it was the same thing. It was this
Oh wow.
beautiful, large, white sandy beach,
Mm.
almost Caribbean looking. Of course, the weather wasn't Caribbean, but it was the wind blowing in fresh from the sea, as per the
Mm.
lyrics. And I remember standing out on this rock and looking down and seeing seals in the water, and thinking, I want a piece of this. So that was the inspiration for
Mm.
the song, and eventually, the place I'm living in.
Yeah. Okay. Judgment Days. It again indicates to me that there's a karma. Is that sort of, in other words, you reap what you sow? Have I got that correct or not?
Well, yeah, it was kind of like, okay. I mean, I felt that, time's up. Time's up for Mrs. Thatcher. It's kind of this was at the end of her sort of tenure as prime minister, and the kind of,
Right.
if you like, looking at it in hindsight, I can maybe be a bit more sympathetic, but I was one of those people who was definitely not a fan, and I thought she caused a lot of harm, and her government caused a lot of harm in those kind of 80s years, and a lot of divisiveness and so on. And so I was hoping that she would go, and towards the very end of the 80s, it was obviously that the knives were out, from some of her own backbenchers and
Mm.
so on. But I was more thinking, okay, I'd heard these stories about her being, surviving on 4 hours sleep and being, incredibly productive. But I was thinking, how do you sleep at night if you know that your policies have caused, unemployment or, hastened the end of the mining industry or whatever? How do you sleep at night? So that was kind of really
Right.
where that song was coming from. Is like,
Okay.
how can you be in that position and be okay with your conscience? So that was the kind of question.
Right. That's very interesting because I also wrote "Who is the legend at the end," but you've actually answered that now, and now that makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Life will never be the same. And also passion. Piazza. Is that correct? Is that how do you spell it? Say it.
Pai shao.
Oh, Pashao. Beg your
Pai
pardon.
shao. Like a pie, like steak pie, and shao like so,
Paixão.
but pai shao. I mean,
Paixão.
yeah, you have to ask a Brazilian to pronounce it properly,
Right.
but pai shao is the nearest that I've got to it.
Because again, both these songs seem as if they're about somebody. Are they or not?
Well, life and never be the same. That's more of an imagined thing. In fact, I came up with the idea of it, and it came as an instrumental before it became a song. But it was kind of like, um, we were having a break in '89 after we'd sort of finished the tour. We'd actually stopped the tour slightly early at the end of the Staring at the Sun tour. And I was down in the island, and Mark took me out on his boat, and it was this beautiful, summer afternoon. And I got home and I started just playing the piano, and this sort of emotion came out of me. And it was partly I was reflecting on the fact that all the changes had happened. I mean, Phil and Boone had left the band, and we were now going forward into this sort of new era with, Al Murphy, well, not to be for very long, rest in peace. But
Yeah.
there was Al and Gary, and it was sort of, I was kind of looking at the future and thinking, well, I don't know, suppose me and Mark end up splitting up. I mean, there was nothing on the cards, but I was just, not fantasizing, but just to get imagining what would that be like,
Mm.
and thinking, how connected we both are, all of those years,
Mm.
we have this amazing connection. It's more like a professional connection than a personal one, but of course it involves the personal. Um, and I was wondering, if I was in a future where Mark and I were working together, there would always be that connection. So it's kind of
Mm.
like, it's sort of talking about that, but in a fairly abstract way. It was not like he said this or this happened.
No.
It was just, it was also taking into account the changes that happened with Phil and Boone.
Yeah.
I love to ride the ocean waves, but life will never be the same. It was like an admitting that, change happens,
Have to.
basically.
Yeah. And obviously, you're still obviously in a great relationship with Mark 41 years later.
Yeah, via WhatsApp at the moment.
Oh, yeah. What else? Oh, lovely day. The only thing I picked up on that was what started in 1942, or is that just literally a date that rhymes?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it was really, it was a comment on kind of warmongers, on people that I can imagine, and certainly probably in former times in governments, particularly in America, you always see these scenes in films of the kind of the war room where the president goes and there's the head
Right.
of the Navy and the head of the Air Force and the head of the CIA, and they're sort of going, okay, so what are we going to do about this situation? And I was thinking, that there's often been this thing where wars are started by people that I think war is a good thing, and being cynical or not, it
Mm.
can be, yes, because it provides jobs for the defense industry,
Mm.
but I
Mm.
think also that there's for those that have been in wars previously, uh, I imagine that they sit by their pool thinking, I miss having a good war.
Oh.
So that was kind of my imagined character, was one of these sort of
Hmm.
generals who'd advise the government saying, I think we ought to hit them with everything we got,
Right. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I must admit,
Bored by his pool.
I'm with Marvin Gaye. War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, there you go.
um,
We haven't
Fall,
learned.
Fallen Angel kind of reminds me of Tracy, really, because obviously that one was about one of Mark's ex-girlfriends. And again, I'm a
No,
no.
no.
The
Gary
full
wrote the words to that. That was
ah.
Gary's thing.
Oh, was it? Right. Okay.
Mm.
Right. So again, is it about an ex-girlfriend or something, or
I think it's based. I think Gary's. I think based it on that. I don't think Tracy was an actual person, if you like, but
ah.
I think he's based it on something like that.
Right. But Fallen Angel, though, is that based on a
That
person?
was about a specific person.
It
That was
was
about
right.
someone
Right.
who I met, who I was at music at Guildhall with,
Ah.
and she was a trumpet student at the
Huh.
time, and I was very shy, in my early days
Right.
in terms of meeting women, and um, so I kind of fancied her from afar, but never said anything, never made a
Right.
move, whatever. And
Mm.
I met her years later, and she said to me, I always fancied you at college.
Ah.
And I said, I had no idea. So if only I'd have known. So
Yeah.
and so that it kind of that was the story, and so she'd invited me. This is these late years later, to go to their the family had a holiday caravan, a stationary caravan in a caravan park right next to Sizewell B in Suffolk. And I remember went for a swim, and she said, "Oh, it's great swimming here because there's this really warm stream that comes down from
Right.
the nuclear
Yeah.
power plant there."
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was right. Anyway, so and of course, she was had a boyfriend. I think which she later engaged and got married to. So
Mm.
I kind of had this fancy of like, what if I tried to break up this great relationship, and You know, what if I sort of plotted and planned to sort of steal her away from him, which I never
Right.
did. But that was the kind of that was the sort of story that I made up in Fallen Angel. You
Mm,
know, it's like, you know, how dare you have these thoughts of, you know, trying to break up something beautiful.
mm.
But that was the inspiration for that song, was like imagining, you know, what if I was a different character, what I might do.
Funny enough, I have experienced the same thing by Bradwell Power Station because I water ski and I go to the Blackwater, and definitely you can feel a warm current come every now and again when you're in the water. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Apparently, it's perfectly safe.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Yes, yes, yes. As my finger falls off. Yeah. The spirit is free. Kind of reminded me of Romeo and Juliet. Actually, again, would that be a good assumption or not? As in lovers that.
No, you're way off. You're
Oh,
way off.
oh, damn! This is the first
Sorry.
one. First one I've got wrong then.
No, no. The Spirit is Free is it's totally inspired by Nelson Mandela,
Ah,
and this is before he came out of jail. But when he was, you know, his stock was rising, and the kind of Free Mandela movement had taken off, and the concerts, and you know, just knowing that there, you know,
oh, I'm losing you
that
slightly.
basically looked like my mum. You know, I'm talking about you know, black people in South Africa,
Yeah.
coloured people, the whole apartheid thing, which, you know, and there was this guy in jail who'd been in jail for 21 years that, you know, potentially was a leader and that people were really inspired by. And, you know, I was just imagining, you know, living in some kind of shanty town, and or, you know, being somewhere where, you know, there'd been things like the Sharpeville massacre and all of that suppression. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if Mandela, you know, got out? And isn't it amazing how much hope he inspires in everyone? So that was really the inspiration for
Ah,
that song. Was like, even if he's in jail, or even if you're in difficult circumstances, you know, you can't chain the spirit down. The spirit can be freed by,
mm,
you know, some thinking of someone else who's inspired you or whatever. So that was the inspiration for that.
excellent. Thank you. And I'm sure people will find this very, to actually hear what the whole album's about and